we've ever had.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Phil
Mr
Goff.
Speaker, I'd like to answer a few questions posed to the House by the gay icon on the other side. And I want to bring a few facts into it. And Maurice Williamson knows this. He knows it, and he'll smile when I give him the answers because he knew them already. First of all, if New Zealand came out well from the global financial crisis, it was because of the state that a Labor government after 9 years left this country in. Now, if he doesn't accept my word for this, I'm quoting from a document from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Treasury and the State Services Commission, produced in November 2011. It's called Better Public Services, and it said this: although New Zealand entered the global economic downturn with a stronger financial position than most OECD countries. Bill English said it, didn't he? Just after becoming Minister of Finance, he said, this is the rainy day that New Zealand has been saving for. Who was he talking about? He was talking about a Labor government because he had only just become the Minister of Finance. And why was New Zealand in a good shape, Maurice Williamson? It was in a good shape because we had paid down our debt when you, Mr Williamson, were talking about spending it on tax cuts. So we had net zero debt for New Zealand when we went into the recession. We had the lowest rate of unemployment in the OECD. And one other thing, Mr Williamson, we'd just signed a trade agreement for free trade with China and the ASEAN countries. And our exports trebled since I signed that agreement in Beijing, trebled to $6 billion, and we were saved from the worst effects of the downturn in Europe and the United States. That's why this country's in good shape. 9 years of surpluses from a Labor government. 9 years of surpluses. Net zero debt. The lowest unemployment rate in the Western world. And trade agreements with China and with Asia. Now, that's the answer to your question, Mr Williamson, not what you were making up as you went along. And you ask about the capital gains tax, and as if this was something extraordinary. We are almost the only country in the OECD that doesn't have one. The Reserve Bank has proposed it. The Treasury have proposed it. The International Monetary Fund has proposed it. The World Bank has proposed it. And in his heart, Maurice Williamson knows it's the right thing to do. Knows it's the right thing to do. And he is smiling now because he knows I'm telling the truth. Now, Mr Speaker, that's enough of Maurice Williamson. I want to talk about the things that are really important to New Zealanders. You know, New Zealanders don't ask for much. They don't actually even expect much, and even so they've been disappointed by what this government has delivered them. What do they want? They want a job, they want a home, they want a good education for their kids, and they want a fair go. None of those things are unreasonable, but that's what the ordinary Kiwi wants. A job, a home, a decent education for their kids, and the government to give them a fair go. And this government, in this budget, has delivered on none of those things. Let's go through them. Jobs. You know, 146,000 New Zealanders out of work. 146,000. In my city of Auckland, it's 7.3%. But in my parts, in the parts of the electorate where I have Pacifica communities living, it's around 15%. For their kids, it's 1 in 3 of their kids not in work. And this government has not delivered on its promises. 2010 in the budget promised 170,000 jobs. And John Key mimicked the budget. He said, we will deliver 170,000 jobs by 2014. He made the same promise in 2011, as did the budget. Twice in a row, 170,000 jobs. And when he went to the people of New Zealand at the election in 2011, what did he promise? 170,000 new jobs. What does the Treasury tell us in this budget? What does it tell us, Mr Coleman? It tells us that you are breaking the promise, that you will fall short of that target that you promised 3 times through your leader and your finance minister by 61,000 jobs. 3 times they promised it. Every promise a broken promise, and 1/3 of the teenage Pacifica kids in my electorate stay out of work. And the answers aren't rocket science. Why are we importing tens of thousands of skilled tradesmen into this country when tens of thousands of our kids are out of work? Why won't the government turn the dole into a payment to encourage employers to take on apprentices? Why won't we give jobs to our young people who are on the dole, out of work, without hope? Because this government, what did it do with skill training? It cut skill training. It didn't grow it, it cut it. And then about the manufacturing in New Zealand. Manufacturing's got a really important role to play. And what has this government done? It has jacked up the dollar value to a point where our manufacturers are going out of business because they cannot compete with a dollar that is overvalued, the Treasury says, by 20%. And where is the guts in the government to actually say we need a new approach to monetary policy? We need to say that the Reserve Bank should be looking at jobs and they should be looking at the exchange rate and not just the inflation rate. They won't change the monetary policy by broadening the objectives and the representation on the board of the bank. And then there's the question of investment policy. Where are people putting their money? They're not putting it into Mighty River Power. Mighty River Power is selling for less than what you floated it for a couple of weeks ago. They're putting it into speculation because it's easy to put money into housing. You can make a lot of money out of it and you don't pay tax when you sell it. So you have a tax-free income. It's a speculator's paradise in New Zealand. And it's great for the speculators. They are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And who's paying that money? The low-income family with their kids, desperate to actually achieve the New Zealand dream of a home of their own. What happens to those families? When I bought my first home, the price of that house in Auckland was 3 times my annual wage. Today it is 10 times the average wage of that young family desperate to get into a home of their own. And what does the government in this budget do about it? Absolutely nothing. No commitment to an affordable housing policy, no commitment to cracking down on speculation through a capital gains tax. Why aren't we getting jobs? Because there isn't the savings. I heard the Prime Minister this afternoon talking about KiwiSaver as if it was his idea. I think they voted against it. And certainly they've done nothing to make it universal, which would create an investment basis for jobs in this country. But I want to come back to housing. You know, if you get a housing program going, it does 2 things. Firstly, it gets people into homes of their own. You know, that used to be a National Party principle, the property-owning democracy. Now you can't do it. The speculators will own 50 houses and the young families won't get a chance for a home of their own. Labor's talking about KiwiBuild, setting up a fund funded by home ownership bonds, rolled over, that would allow us to create 10,000 houses a year with all of the jobs, all of the skill training that involves, and the opportunity for people to own their own homes. Labor would put a warrant of fitness on rental housing. The government comes out with its insulation policy. I can get cheap insulation for my house on my income, but most of the low-income families in our country live in flats. The lowest take-up for insulating homes was from rental properties. Those are the families with low wages, living in cold, damp, unhealthy conditions, absenteeism from work because they're sick too often, absenteeism from school because they're not well and they fall behind in their learning. Why hasn't the government done something about that as a warrant of fitness for rental housing? That would really make a difference. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that's obvious is lower power prices. You know, the Wallach report said that the power companies were making a killing out of power prices. They were gouging to the extent, he said, of $4.2 billion. When will the national government realise that the Bradford reforms have failed? Simon Bridges got up and said they haven't had long enough. They haven't had long enough. They have had 16 years and they have failed, and it's time that we actually gave some of the dividend back from the power stations that our forebears and my father-in-law helped build by giving it back to New Zealand consumers by way of cuts to the price of their electricity. What difference would it make to a low-income family to have their power bill cut by $300 a year. A huge amount of difference, Mr Speaker, and we will do it.
Mr Speaker.
I call Jackie Dean.
Mr Speaker, under the National Government